Evil Mil mocked my miscarriage and called me a trophy wife at her anniversary party. Her husband's shocking move changed everything. My husband John and I have been together for nearly 8 years. We are quite happy in our marriage, but when it comes to my husband's parents, there is always a bit of conflict. Unfortunately, my mother-in-law has always harbored negative feelings toward me right from the moment we got engaged. Fael was sweet but would always let Ml walk all over him and mostly kept to himself. My husband comes from a more affluent background than I do, and my mother-in-law has always viewed this as a reason to dislike me. From the beginning, she would act like my belonging to a middle-class family was somehow wrong. She would make comments about my looks, my outfits, or my shoes. I admit I was not self-conscious before, but I always dressed up appropriately regardless of who I was meeting. However, it was never enough, and due to her incessant comments, I started buying expensive clothes specifically to wear on occasions when I had to meet her, so she wouldn't look at me in pity. On one occasion, I wore a white shirt that she had seen me wear a month ago, and Ml immediately made a comment about how I was repeating my clothes and how well-off people don't do this. She sneered at how embarrassing it was. My husband did try to stop her, but Ml would knowingly make these comments in front of everyone, so I would be red-faced in embarrassment. She would even force me to go shopping with her and buy me the type of clothes I didn't like wearing. However, I would gratefully accept her gestures and thank her sincerely. I always made an effort to nurture a positive relationship with them because I genuinely believed she would eventually warm up to me. But then things started to escalate, and the strings-attached aspect of her generosity became apparent. While we were still less than a year into dating, I got a job in a really good company that allowed me to upgrade my lifestyle significantly. John was really happy for me, but when Mil found out, she was not. She started calling and texting me, demanding I let her know exactly how much I was earning since, according to her, females in their family should always earn less than their men. I was really offended and pointed out that I was bound to earn more than my husband in the long run since I work in the pharmaceutical field, which is really lucrative. Mil then started telling me that I was allowed to do this job if I wanted. But when I got married to John, I had to leave it so that other family members wouldn't talk about how John wasn't able to provide. This really made me laugh as it wasn't the 1950s anymore, and John never had a problem with my job or my income. I decided to talk to John directly about this and let him know how his mother was making me feel uncomfortable. He was furious that she had been contacting me and texting me about all this. I don't know what he said to Mil, but she called me screaming and crying about how I was trying to drive a wedge between her and her son and how I was the devil incarnate. She said she would never allow John to marry a woman like me and that I needed to break up with him. I hung up the phone and blocked her because I was starting to get really tired of her toxic behavior. That was the first major red flag. Of course, John and I never broke up, but it did make me wonder about the type of mother he grew up with. Through the years, I could not completely cut off Mil since there were several family occasions where John was invited, and I would have to go as well where she would be present. Mil would completely ignore me and act like I didn't exist. For example, if we walked into John's cousin's birthday party, everyone would greet us, and Mil would come rushing to hug John and ask him about his day. If John tried to bring me into the conversation, she would look around disinterested and quickly change the subject. The one pattern I began to notice was that she would always bring up her health issues and tell John about how she was getting old and frail and how one day she could just drop dead, so he needed to take care of her more, even though she had absolutely no health issues whatsoever and was perfectly fine. It was weird the way she would try to manipulate her own son to get some emotional appeal and attention from him. When John proposed to me after years of dating, he invited everyone to our engagement party. My parents and grandparents were really happy for us, but I can't say the same for my husband's parents. Mil came to our party with a scowl on her face, and her expression soured even more when she saw the ring on my hand. She started to tell John how disrespectful it was for him to buy me a bigger ring than the one she got from Fael. Fael tried to stop her, urging her not to make a scene, but Mil kept saying how her son could not do anything good for her. Yet he was doing everything for this poor girl. This pissed me off, so I told her that if she could not respect me, then she needed to leave. Mil was shocked to hear this, but I knew I could not let her ruin the happiest day of my life, and that too in front of my entire family. Fael escorted her out while she kept yelling for John, who had my back. Later, Mil called to apologize to John, claiming she was drunk, even though we all knew she hardly drank a glass of wine. But because Mil was apologizing to both of us, we decided to let it slide. Then came the planning of the wedding. Mil insisted that she be included during my dress shopping, saying how she had always wanted to do this. It's important to note that, during this time, my patience with her was already running thin. But she was the mother to my fiancé, and I could not blatantly be disrespectful to her, so I allowed her to come. I did warn my mother and cousin about it so they were ready if she pulled any stunt. Just like clockwork, as expected, Mil had a problem with my dress. She told me how sophisticated people didn't wear so many laces and demanded that I wear a more traditional white dress. I refused, and my mother told her that I was not her daughter, so she should keep her mouth shut. Mail got pissed and started to pout in a corner with her arms crossed like a toddler. Throughout the time I tried on clothes, she was nothing but nasty toward my dress choices. In the end, I did decide on a dress and paid for it. Mail then came up to me and told me how she was glad I picked that dress because it made my arms look fat, and giggled. Hearing this comment, my mother, who had been incredibly patient, started to yell at her and admonish her for her immature behavior. I was on the verge of tears because no one wants to hear something like that about their dream dress, and I am not even fat, so I could not understand why she would say something like that. We let her know that she was going to have to find her own way back home since I had picked up everyone that day, and I refused to let her come back with us since I knew she would continue to say things about me in the car. Mail started to freak out, saying how I could not just leave her, but that's exactly what I did. While I was on the way to drop off my mother, I got a call from John, who started to ask how I could ever do this to his mother and how she had called him crying, accusing me of leaving her knowingly. I told John that I would explain everything once I got back home, but he continued to berate me. So my mother, who could hear everything since he was on speaker, let him know that he had no idea what his mother had done to us the whole day. She continued to list, one by one, how Mil had behaved, and in the end, asked John if he thought this was how well-respected adults behave. Clearly, John was embarrassed since he had no idea about the whole story. Obviously, Mil had not told him the full picture. Later, when he came back home, he apologized to me again. He told me how he just freaked out, thinking his old mother was left all alone, so he reacted that way. I told him that I would never have done something like that had she not been nasty to me the entire day. John hugged me and let me know that he would understand if I wanted to uninvite her from our wedding. At this point, I would have wanted nothing more than to uninvite her, but I was worried that Phil might not be able to come since his wife would not let him attend if she wasn't attending. I could not let my husband's wedding pass by without his parents present. It would be just outright cruel. We decided to talk to Phil before our wedding and informed him that if Mil's behavior started to get out of hand, he would have to remember to remove her. He understood and assured us that he knew exactly what we were going through. I felt bad for the poor guy for having to handle her 24/7. During the wedding, Mil was surprisingly well behaved. She kept bragging to everyone about how grand our celebration was, as if she had paid for anything. It was all me and my husband's wedding fund, yet his family assumed that since he was from an affluent family and Mil always showed off about it, maybe she and Phil had paid for our wedding. However, during the wedding toast, Phil made it clear that they had not paid a single dime, and this was all a result of our hard work. He also talked about how proud he was to have an accomplished daughter-in-law and never imagined that his son could finally lock down someone as intelligent as me. Later, guests congratulated us, as they were surprised we had managed to pull off such a spectacular wedding on our own. Mil's face soured, and she was clearly pissed at Phil. During the father-daughter dance, my dad and I danced for a while, and everyone clapped. John was about to come and take over when Mil came running and said how she needed to be the first woman to dance with her baby boy before any other woman. John obliged, and they danced. Later during the wedding, Mil came up to me and congratulated me. I politely smiled when, out of nowhere, she told me I was wrong. I don't think your arms look that fat in this dress, and then walked away as if it was nothing. It really pissed me off, but I didn't want her mean comments to ruin my beautiful day. Everyone had a good time, and we danced through the night and maybe drank too much. The next day, when I woke up, I had several messages from Mil. Imagine my shock when I read through the messages and realized she had written about how I had embarrassed her throughout the night and how I needed to do better if I was going to be part of her family. I was a bit hungover but remembered everything throughout the night. Just in case, I called my parents to ask them if I had said or done anything embarrassing. They assured me I hadn't and that everyone had been having a great time. Later, when my husband woke up, I showed him all the messages. He told me to ignore them, but I got suspicious and asked him what Mil had meant. This is when John revealed that throughout the night, Mil had been coming up to him and telling him how I was having too much fun and how, even while dancing with my cousins, I was behaving like a wild horse that he needed to control. John said all of this jokingly, telling me how he had ignored her comments then and that I should ignore her comments now. However, I was deeply offended that she would imply something like that when I was simply dancing with my family at my wedding. She had no right to talk about me that way. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but John and I were leaving for our honeymoon, so I decided to put it on the back burner. Our honeymoon was wonderful, and we had such a great time. The day we returned home, Mil called me and started sweetly asking about the honeymoon, which was very out of character for her. I told her I didn't appreciate what she had said about me to John on our wedding night. She quickly brushed it off, claiming she hadn't meant any harm. Then, she pried for details about our honeymoon, repeatedly asking if we had a lot of alone time. I was confused by her prying, so I asked her to be straight with me since our honeymoon was none of her business. Mil then revealed her true intent. She wanted to know if she was going to be a grandmother soon. I almost gagged hearing her say that, for two reasons. First, John and I had just gotten married and had not even been back a week. There was no way we were thinking about kids that soon. Second, John and I had decided years ago that we didn't want children, and our decision hadn't changed. This wasn't something we had told our families outright because it was our private decision. I tried to stay polite, but Emil kept going on about my biological clock ticking and how I was in my best baby-making years. Then, she took it a step further, saying we needed to stop using condoms. That was the final straw. I shut her down immediately and told her I was done with the conversation. When I told John about the call, he was furious. He immediately called her to give her a piece of his mind and confessed that we didn't want children. As expected, Emil exploded. She screamed and raged over the phone, acting as if we had committed some unspeakable crime. She began threatening to cut John out of her will if he didn't give her grandchildren. John laughed and reminded her that she owned no assets, as everything belonged to Phil due to their prenup. Emil then screamed at me, saying this was all my fault, and that as a woman, my only job was to give a child to my husband. She called me faulty, which was extremely hurtful. John begged her to stop, but she continued her tirade, blaming me for destroying her lifelong dream of being a grandmother. Finally, John put his foot down. He told her he was done with her toxic behavior and that we were cutting her out of our lives. He warned her never to come to our home or contact us again, or we would call the police. Since then, we've stuck to our word. Phil tried to mediate once, but after hearing the full story from John, he supported our decision. Over the years, Phil and my parents have met with us several times, and Emil has not been invited to any of these gatherings. Thankfully, she has respected our boundaries. In December of last year, something unexpected happened. I became pregnant. It was completely unplanned, and we were both shocked. Since we had never wanted children, we initially didn't know how to feel. But after the initial shock wore off, we decided to embrace it. We were in a good place in our lives and thought we could provide a happy home for our child. The pregnancy news spread quickly, and everyone, including Phil and my parents, was overjoyed. Emil sent a bouquet of flowers with a letter of apology, claiming she had changed after years of therapy. I was skeptical given her history and chose not to respond to her message. John and I focused on preparing for the baby, excited to start this new chapter in our lives. However, 2 months into the pregnancy, tragedy struck. I miscarried. It happened in the middle of the night. I woke up to find blood and froze in shock. John woke up to my sobs and immediately rushed me to the hospital. There, the doctor confirmed the heartbreaking news. We had lost the baby. Even though we hadn't planned the pregnancy, the loss hit us hard. It felt like the wind had been knocked out of me, and I was overwhelmed with grief. John was my rock through this difficult time. My parents stayed with us, offering support, and even Phil visited to check on us. However, I sank into a deep depression and barely got out of bed. My mom would stay for days to ensure I ate and showered. John did everything he could to help me process the grief, and though it was a slow process, I started to feel better bit by bit. Last week, Phil invited us to his and Emil's 25th wedding anniversary party. It was a significant milestone, and he begged us to attend, promising it would be a relaxing evening for us. At first, we were hesitant. We didn't want to face Emil, nor did we want to talk about the miscarriage. But Phil convinced us, saying it would be good for us to take a break and just enjoy ourselves. Reluctantly, we agreed to go. At the party, Emil seemed shocked but delighted to see John and rushed to hug him. She was cold toward me, but I didn't care and found a seat away from her. Later during dinner, the conversation turned to happy news within the family. One of John's cousins announced her pregnancy, and though I tried to remain composed, it felt like a stab to my heart. Everyone congratulated her, and I managed to smile through the pain. Then, Emil stood up and took the microphone for a toast. She began by thanking everyone for coming and saying how proud she was of her family. But things took a cruel turn when she congratulated John's cousin for her pregnancy and then, looking directly at me, said, "Some people kill their children before they even have the chance to be born." The room fell silent. I felt the air leave my lungs as her words sank in. Emil continued, doubling down on her disgusting rejoins, implying that I had intentionally caused the miscarriage. She went on to say how John had settled for me, how I had failed to give her grandchildren, and how she couldn't wait for John to come to his senses and divorce me. She ended her vile speech by calling me a trophy wife and cheering as if she had just delivered a triumphant monologue. John immediately stood up, his face red with fury, and demanded to know what the hell Emil was doing. A screaming match ensued between them, with Emil continuing to hurl insults at me. She accused me of destroying her family and ruining her life. John defended me fiercely, telling her how disgusting her behavior was. But her words had already cut deep, and I couldn't hold back my tears. I ran out of the room, completely overwhelmed by the humiliation. As I stood outside, trying to catch my breath and calm down, I heard the door behind me open. I expected it to be John, but to my surprise it was Phil. He looked calm, yet there was a fire in his eyes I had never seen before. He walked back into the party and took the microphone from Mal, who was still ranting. With a steady voice, Phil asked everyone to be quiet. The room fell silent as he began to speak. He started by addressing Mal directly, saying, "For 25 years, I've tolerated your behavior. I've stayed in this marriage for the sake of John and to keep the family together. But tonight, you've shown your true colors in front of everyone." Mal looked stunned as he continued, "I can no longer stand by and watch you destroy relationships with your hatred and cruelty. You've embarrassed yourself, disrespected my son and daughter-in-law, and proven you don't deserve the family you claim to care about. There will be no 26th anniversary because I'm done." The entire room gasped in shock. Mal looked like she had been slapped, her face frozen in disbelief. Phil placed the microphone down, removed his suit jacket and tie, and calmly announced he was leaving. As he walked out, Mal screamed at him to come back, but he didn't look back. Instead, he walked out of the party and left everyone in stunned silence. Mal turned her rage toward me, screaming that I had ruined her life and that everything was my fault. But John stepped in, telling her that her own actions were to blame and that Phil had finally had enough of her toxic behavior. Some guests tried to comfort Mal, while others came over to check on me. John's pregnant cousin hugged me, whispering that I was strong and that none of this was my fault. After Phil left, the atmosphere in the room shifted entirely. People began whispering amongst themselves, clearly shocked by the turn of events. Some guests started leaving quietly, while others tried to salvage the celebration by focusing on the food and drinks. Meanwhile, Mal continued her outburst, yelling that she would never forgive me for what I'd done. John stood firm and told her, "You've brought this on yourself. You've disrespected my wife, embarrassed our family, and now you're paying the price. Don't blame anyone else for your actions." Mal tried to lash out further, but her words began falling on deaf ears as more guests began leaving, clearly uncomfortable with the scene she had created. After a while, Mal stormed out of the party, muttering threats and curses under her breath. John and I decided to leave soon after. We found Phil sitting at a nearby bar, having a quiet drink by himself. When he saw us, he smiled and raised his glass. "I'm finally free," he said, his tone calm and resolute. Over the next few weeks, Phil moved in with us while he began the process of filing for divorce. Mal tried desperately to contact him, leaving him countless voicemails and messages, but he ignored them all. She even showed up uninvited at our house a couple of times, but we stood by our promise to call the police if she trespassed again. After that, she seemed to back off, likely realizing she was out of options. As the months passed, Phil officially served Mal with divorce papers. She was furious and tried to fight the terms of their prenuptial agreement, but the prenup was airtight. She ended up with the contents of their joint account and her car, but she had no claim to the house or any of Phil's other assets. Mal's reputation among family and friends was in shambles. The events at the anniversary party had opened everyone's eyes to her true nature. As Phil's divorce proceedings moved forward, Mal found herself increasingly isolated. Most family members and friends distanced themselves after witnessing her behavior at the anniversary party. Those who initially sympathized with her gradually realized the extent of her toxicity and stopped offering support. Meanwhile, Phil adapted quickly to his newfound freedom. Living with us, he seemed lighter, as though a massive weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He started pursuing hobbies he had put aside during his marriage, including woodworking and gardening. He even reconnected with old friends he hadn't seen in years due to Mal's controlling nature. Mal, on the other hand, continued her attempts to play the victim. She reached out to extended family members, spinning tales about how Phil had abandoned her and how John and I had conspired to destroy her life. However, these stories didn't hold much weight, especially after people remembered her public meltdown at the party. After months of legal battles, the divorce was finalized. Phil retained ownership of his house, while Mal received a modest financial settlement and her car. She tried to contest the prenup, but her case was thrown out almost immediately. Furious, she accused Phil and his lawyer of conspiring against her, but it was clear she had no legal ground to stand on. Phil moved back into his home after the divorce and began making renovations to give it a fresh start. He insisted we come over for dinner often, and it became a regular family tradition. For the first time in years, he seemed genuinely happy and at peace. Mal struggled to find stability after the divorce. She moved into a small apartment, supported by the settlement money, but her lifestyle was far from what she had been used to. She made several attempts to reach out to John and Phil, but her messages were either ignored or met with firm boundaries. In one particularly desperate attempt, she showed up uninvited at Phil's house, claiming she had changed and wanted to reconcile. Phil calmly asked her to leave, reminding her that their marriage was over. When she refused, he called the police, and she was escorted off the property. After that incident, she stopped trying to contact him directly. John and I decided to focus on healing from the emotional turmoil MIL had caused. We both attended therapy sessions, individually and as a couple, which helped us process the grief of our miscarriage and the years of stress from dealing with MIL. Through therapy, John began to understand how his upbringing had shaped his initial reluctance to stand up to his mother, and he worked hard to set stronger boundaries. Our relationship grew stronger than ever. We took the time to travel, strengthen our careers, and enjoy each other's company. FIL became a regular part of our lives, and his presence brought a sense of joy and stability to our family. Final update. It has now been a year since the anniversary party that changed everything. MIL remains distant, occasionally trying to stir drama through mutual acquaintances, but her efforts have little impact. Most people see her behavior for what it is and no longer indulge her. FIL has embraced his independence and is even considering dating again, much to our amusement. He jokes that he might find someone who's the polar opposite of MIL this time around. As for John and me, we've found peace and happiness in our lives. While the loss of our child still weighs on us, we've learned to carry that grief together, and it has made us stronger as a couple. We've surrounded ourselves with supportive friends and family, and we are finally living the life we envisioned, free from MIL's toxicity.